and welcome to Property Matters here on Dublin South FM. You can contact the show on Twitter, Facebook or LinkedIn at iPropertyRadio, or indeed email hello@iPropertyRadio.com. Your host for today is myself, Carol Talman, and I'm delighted to be joined by Senator John Cummins, Fine Gael spokesperson for Housing, Local Government and Heritage. John, thank you so much for joining us today. It has been such a bumper few weeks in housing. We definitely need somebody to talk us through some of the more recent bills.
Oh, delighted to join you, Carol. More than happy to do so.
So, John, we'll get stuck straight in. Well, first of all, has there ever been a busier time from a legislation point of view, a legislation being brought forward for housing?
No, I don't think so. It's been great to be in the thick of it. As Fine Gael spokesman on housing, local government and heritage, we've had a lot of bills through the Seanad in the last number of months. I think we've had 7 bills across planning and development, residential tenancies, the Land Development Agency, the Affordable Housing Bill, and those 2 last ones in particular are really groundbreaking pieces of legislation, which I believe is going to have a huge impact for individuals and families over the next number of years.
Okay, well, look, 7 bills. I hadn't even realised it was that many. I was kind of keeping track of maybe 4. So you might just talk us through. You mentioned there that the latter 2 were really the ones that potentially could have the greatest impact on where we find ourselves now in terms of housing delivery. So you might just talk us through. Let's start with the LDA bill, because I feel like we're probably going to spend a lot of time on affordable housing. So you might just talk us through that one before we start.
Yeah, so obviously the Land Development Agency has been established, but working, I suppose, without the power of legislation behind it. So it was important to get that legislation passed before the summer recess. They're working on 9 sites across the country at the moment in terms of developing their plans, and the one that is most advanced at the moment is Shangana Castle, which hopefully will break ground before the end of the year, if not early next year. And really it's about delivering public housing on public land. The Minister is very intent on delivering 100% social, affordable, cost rental, affordable purchase across sites in Dublin and Cork, and 70% in other areas outside of Dublin and Cork. So, that agency is about, firstly identifying all of the public land banks in areas with, a population of above 10,000, and then really putting those sites to work. It could be land that's owned by any state agency, HSE, across the whole range, and they will work hand in glove with the local authorities as well.
Okay, and you mentioned there public housing on public land, but obviously we know from poor bad experience that mixed tenure is absolutely the route to go for building sustainable communities. So how does that fit with the remit of the LDA?
Yeah, so and I share that also. I think it's very important that we get the mix correct in all areas, and I suppose it's one of the reasons why the 70% is there outside of Dublin and Cork. I know in my own county in Waterford, we would have an area of the city that, over the last number of years, following the crash, that only social housing was built in an area. So it's very important that you have the flexibility to be able to get the private and affordable housing into those communities and neighbourhoods. So it is about delivering a whole suite of measures. You have your social housing, but what we're rolling out, which I know we'll touch on with the Affordable Housing Bill, is for Ireland's first cost rental model, which is about giving secure tenancies, lifelong tenancies for individuals and families, renters, and then you will have affordable purchase schemes there as well, where an equity stake will be taken in the property by the state to reduce the costs for individuals and families and make it more reachable for those people to be able to get their foot on the ladder.
Yeah, and that's of course welcome at this stage. But before we touch on to maybe some of the particulars of the Affordable Housing Bill, we might just come back to maybe the role that the private sector will play in the delivery of vital new homes, to create that mixed tenure under the lands that are under the remit now of the Land Development Agency. How can that be done in a way that's palatable? And I'm going to be very blunt here and say we know that there's been so much criticism of different solution providers to housing, and it's just counterproductive because obviously we need all of these solution providers. So how will we be able to bring the public and the private sector together in a way that isn't seen to be a developer's incentive or something like that?
Yeah, and I think politicians have a large role to play in that. To be honest with you, I think people are trying to score a lot of points in relation to political and ideological arguments around housing. But, the people that come into my office on a daily basis with housing queries, they don't care for that ideological debate. My party believes in home ownership, and I think we can deliver it by any mechanism possible. Councils, approved housing bodies, the Land Development Agency, public-private partnerships, private builders, leases. You can't take any of those methods off the table when you're in a housing crisis. You have to use every tool at your disposal. And it really does frustrate me on a daily basis listening to some opposition spokespeople saying that you can't, the LDA can't deliver affordable houses. You can't do public-private partnerships. You can't use leases. The very people that go into these properties, are we trying to consign those people to hotel rooms? Is that what people are saying is far better? In my opinion, a lease, a long-term 25-year lease is far better for an individual or family than consigning them to a hotel room. And I make absolutely no apology for saying that. And, I think it's high time that everybody realises that in order to solve a crisis, you have to use every tool at your disposal.
John, what you're saying makes absolute sense. And we've had too much of pitting one solution provider against the other. And I think you're 100% right. There are people who need homes and they actually don't care what the legal mechanism is. They just want to provide for their family. They just want the security. They don't want to be living in hotel rooms where they don't even have private facilities to take care of their family. So I absolutely get that. Can I ask, are you maybe and I don't put you in a difficult spot by saying, but as you're in your role as a senator, are you maybe in a position that you can speak freely in a way that maybe TDs can't?
No, look, we work closely across the Oireachtas with our colleagues. Both in as TDs or senators, we're all legislators, and in my opinion, we're all there to put solutions and pass legislation which will benefit the people of Ireland. And as I said, genuinely, people don't care who delivers houses. They just want houses delivered. And if you look at where we've come from to where we are now, in 2013, we were building 4,500 homes. In 2020, we delivered 20,500. It would have been 25,000 last year and 28,000 this year only for COVID. So we do have some lost ground to make up, not only, from last year, but also looking forward to reaching our targets of, 33,000 homes a year. So, you're not going to get to that quantum of housing units if you don't use every tool at your disposal.
Yeah, and that's a very fair point. And actually, I'm glad that you commended the delivery for 2020, because I think that exceeded all expectations.
Absolutely.
And I can see from working across the planning, construction, property and PropTech sectors that we could see the momentum going forward. We could see all of the downtime was used to plan how to most efficiently get back to site. So there wasn't the long lead-in time that you would normally have. We saw this huge rush to embrace technology to drive even further efficiencies. We saw shift working coming in. We saw all of these things. So the industry really did pull out all the stops against all odds. And so last year's figures actually well exceeded all expectations.
And I think they're going to do so again this year. I talk to people across the sector, every day of the week, and, everyone is committed. Everybody understands, the difficulty that's there for individuals and families, and supply is the key element of it. And, I know everybody is working exceptionally hard in order to try and ramp up production of houses for our people.
But only so much is within the industry's control. Just last week, the Irish Times reported that 48% of all the homes that were granted planning through the strategic housing development process, 48% were subject to judicial review, and that's only in the first 6 months of 2021.
Yes, and look, it's arguable whether this strategic housing development has delivered what the goal of it was. Yes, it has streamlined the process in certain cases, but obviously if you have judicial reviews, it does hold it up. Obviously, the government is phasing out the SHD process by February of next year, but in doing so, they will be given local authorities the remit to be able to deal with larger housing developments in a prioritisation manner, because we can't have developments that we need planning permissions and we need delivery on the ground, and the key first step of that is obviously a planning permission. It was an attempt at a point in time in order to try and increase permissions. And, there are a large number of units that do have permission, and we do need to see delivery by the sector on those that do have planning permission also.
Okay, and can I ask then, you mentioned there that the SHD is being phased out between October and February of next year. Last week I interviewed the general counsel for one of the private developers, and she called for the choice to be given to developers who are submitting planning for 100 plus units between now and October, potentially to be able to choose to go directly to their local authority as opposed to having to go down the SHD route. What do you think that that's something that could be workable?
Yes, I think it's something that needs to be discussed, I suppose, with the sector, and I know the Minister has engaged across the board in relation to this. In my experience, and look, the Waterford market is different, of course, to the Dublin market, but in some cases there are developers that have gone in with phases of developments below the 100 in order to go to the local authority as opposed to going directly to the board. So that is happening in regional Ireland as well. So that would fit in with what your previous speaker obviously said as well.
Yeah, that's really only an option though for people delivering houses as opposed to apartments. Because obviously with apartments,
I suppose it just goes to show the interest, I suppose, in going the local authority route as opposed to directly to the board with the SHD process and keeping it below the 100 units. But I do think, look, as I said, it was a move at a point in time in order to try and streamline the process. There are significant numbers of permissions that are out there that we need to see commencements on. But in the interim period between now and October, I do think that's something that can be moved on. But look, that's obviously the prerogative of the Minister also.
Yeah, the law of unintended consequences, it tends to catch up. And so look, maybe we'll get focused on the affordable housing bill, because that's truly transformative, and there are so many really important key elements. Now, we touched on it a couple of times over the past month in the show, but it would be great maybe if you could give us an overview as to the main components.
Yeah, well, there's four key elements to the affordable housing bill. There's the affordable purchase scheme for local authorities to deliver, affordable houses on local authority lands. There is the increase in the Part 5 provision from 10% to 20%. So private developments had 10% social. Now it is 10% social, 10% affordable. So, that is going to have an impact in terms of new permissions going forward from this point in time. There is the shared equity scheme, which has got a lot of unfounded criticism, in my opinion. And then we also have the cost rental, which is based along the Vienna model, where people will have secure tenancies. All of the initial 8 sites are at least 25% below market rents. They'll have secure tenancies, and that the cost or the rent is calculated based on the cost of maintaining those developments over a 40-year period. And that was one of the changes that we actually made in the Seanad. We actually moved it from 30 years to 40 years, which will actually have the impact of being able to reduce the upfront rent of people at the outset. And obviously all of those rents are linked to the cost of inflation or the CPI, as opposed to the general market, even though we have passed other legislation to also link rents to the CPI now, as opposed to the 4% that was there previously.
Okay. Well, the cost rental, and I'm glad, thank you for expanding on that, because that's one that's really subject to misinterpretation, and not just generally, but by the industry as well. There seemed to have been quite a lack of understanding about what that is. And I know the Housing Agency in particular, maybe 2-3 years ago, actually hosted an exhibition giving all the information about the Vienna model down in the CHQ. And that ran, as far as I recall, for at least a couple of weeks. So there was, there really was a softly approach taken to educating people about this and why it would work. And in one way, it looked almost idealistic, because given in Vienna, is it 60 or 70% of the general population are housed in effectively state housing.
And the difference being that they obviously started directly after the war, and they've managed to build up such a significant quantum of public housing that they're able to do a lot more with it. And certainly, if we fast forward 40 years from now, we will be in that position as well, because as we deliver a higher quantum of houses and they're paid off over the 40-year period, it allows you to do a lot more then at that point going forward. So that's how I suppose Vienna are leading the way in terms of what they're doing. But, it's very significant that 440 of these cost rental units will be delivered this year, not next year, this year in 2021, across 8 sites in Dublin and Cork. And, it's our goal to deliver them across all of our urban centres, primarily at the outset, Dublin, Cork, Limerick, Galway, Waterford, and then to roll it out even further. But the LDA will have a role to play in that, and the approved housing bodies are obviously playing a key role now in what is being seen as, a proof of concept that, this model will work in Ireland. I suppose I've had these discussions with the Minister and Department. I didn't think that we needed to prove the concept, because I know that this will work in Ireland, and I suppose that goes to show by the level of demand in Fingal. I think there was the first 25 units were released or announced by the Minister a couple of weeks ago, and there was over 500 applications for them. So, the demand is certainly there. The fact that it's 25% below market rent, and the big one, I suppose, is that, if you choose to continue to live there, you can live there for as long as you wish.
Yeah, the demand that's been shown so far could also be seen as a huge failure of the marketplace and of the housing, that in general you have people who are working that can't afford to rent privately or live privately. So while yes, it's a positive development for the Irish market, it also underscores just how broken our housing system is. And I suppose I'm trying to, there's a juxtaposition there, at the start of the interview, you did rightly articulate that Fine Gael has always been the party of home ownership, and yet the Vienna model is the antithesis of that.
Yeah, and look, any functioning market, you have to have a proper functioning rent rental market alongside, an owner-occupier market. And, Dublin is quite a transient place in many ways, with a lot of the multinational corporations that are based there. And we have a lot of people that, come from other countries, maybe live and work in Dublin for a period of time and then maybe move back home. So, you always need to have a proper functioning rental market. But, over time, the cost rental model will directly compete, I suppose, with the private rental market, and that will, in time, and it's not going to be today or tomorrow, will have an impact of reducing rents. But the key other elements of that affordable housing bill is the affordable purchase scheme for local authorities, local authority purchase on local authority lands, and the shared equity scheme. And, I've heard so much written and spoken about the shared equity scheme that, in some way it's something that's going to have such a negative impact in terms of the market. But what the shared equity scheme is actually designed to do is to bridge the gap between what an individual or a family can afford under the macroprudential rules and the cost of the unit, and up to a maximum of 20%. And I've heard sightings of the London School of Economics report that have said that it resulted in huge inflation. But the fact of the matter is the UK Audit Office, which is the equivalent of our Controller Auditor General, said that scheme in the UK actually resulted in an increase of supply by 14% and inflation of only 1%. So quite different to what the London School of Economics presented. But their scheme is different to our scheme, because what we've actually done is we've built in caps into the maximum purchase price of the unit, which wasn't the case in the UK scheme. And under the Irish scheme, you will have to get your maximum mortgage, and then it is the equity will be the gap between the maximum mortgage. Whereas in the UK scheme, you could choose to get a lower amount and a higher equity stake in it. So there are significant differences there, which will have an impact of reducing the impact of the scheme on the market. But in my opinion, there's no doubt that it will increase supply.
I'm so glad that in tackling the criticism of the shared equity scheme that you have pointed out that a lot of this is actually coming from some of the narrative, and there's a number of residents groups speaking out about this in the UK, but it is a different system. And in fact, the Guardian newspaper has been running a campaign for some time, really extolling the negative side of shared equity. So I think it's really important to distinguish between the Irish and the English offering, because they're not the same.
They're not the same, but importantly, it's also important to point to the UK Audit Office, because if you were looking for facts and figures in relation to something, you would go to our Controller Auditor General as the de facto on figures. So, I think a lot of the misinformation that's been put out there in the UK has been seized upon by people with, a certain political narrative and spin in the Irish context. But, I'm 34, my friends, my peers, that are in jobs that are trying to get their foot on the ladder and are in high rental accommodation, they're the people that we're trying to help, and they're the people that will benefit from the shared equity scheme. And I suppose, Carol, it's like the Help to Buy scheme that's helped 22,500 people to purchase their first home. The opposition want to abolish that and get rid of it. But as somebody said to me only last week, that's what's going to get me my first house. He's in a very good job. He's on his own. He doesn't, so it's not a dual mortgage. But he said that Help to Buy is the difference between me purchasing this home and not. So it's about using all of the schemes in tandem with one another to be able to assist individuals and families. And that's what we're about as a government.
I think, again, this comes back to not pitting one solution or one mechanism against the other. We need actually all of these solutions. John, you've been so generous with your time, and I am conscious we've run slightly over. Just one really final question, if I may. The Housing Commission. I seem to be alone in my optimism for thinking that the Housing Commission could really prove to be a turning point for housing in Ireland. And like I said, I seem to be alone in my optimism. However, I feel that an independent body is exactly what's needed here. And I'm comparing that to the Bord Fáilte and the Fáilte Ireland, and these boards that are able to maintain very long-term strategies to do things that need to be done over a decade, not over maybe an election cycle of 4 years. Am I hopelessly naive in my optimism?
No, I don't think you are. It does have a role. I'm very supportive of the Housing Commission and the role that it's going to play. But I suppose from a government perspective, I hope I have tried to explain all of the things that we are trying to do. We haven't been waiting for a Housing Commission. We've been getting on and doing the work. And I'm absolutely convinced that, the legislation that we've passed, and, there'll be more tenancy legislation into the autumn as well that will be brought forward by government. But I'm convinced that the legislation will have delivered, the foundations to be able to deliver the bricks and mortar on the ground in conjunction with all stakeholders and bodies. And, that's the only way forward.
Okay, that's a good positive note to end on. John, thank you so much. You've been, as I said, very generous with your time and I appreciate it. So that was Senator John Cummins, Fine Gael spokesperson on housing, local government and heritage.